Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Sam Carlton. If you hear something, in addition to the questions, I hope you don't mind, Steve, if I hijack a little. If you hear something you like, feel free to drop like lightning bolts or something, just to like if something resonates with you or you're excited about something. So there's going to be three parts to this presentation. Let me start up and start presenting my slides. You can see that, right, Steve?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So we're going to talk about what's the deal with Google search and speed. And so, first of all, Google has introduced a new ranking signal that informs how it decides on the order of search results. What this means is performance now has a bigger impact on your site. Oh, it didn't go. There we go. And so, what this means is that you had, it was kind of a good thing as a developer to make your sites fast, but now you have an even bigger business case for doing it to sell to your boss. In general, fast sites lead to higher conversion rates, more engagement with users, and just great things across the board. And for a long time, Google has been pushing to get people to take it seriously, and some have, a lot haven't. And so this is their next venture, their next kind of process in that campaign. And what it basically means is, like, if you make your site fast, Google will give you a ranking benefit from that. So you should be, you should be building sites fast. You have that justification now. So what is Core Web? Getting into the stats, this is, I can't show like client projects, obviously, but this is a side project I did of listing Apple Silicon apps. And this is kind of the impact it had. Initially, it had a few 100,000 impressions a month. And it's getting from Core Web Vitals, it's gotten about a 15% boost, as low as a 50% boost for its traffic every month, because of the Core Web Vitals. And the funny part is the Core Web Vitals ranking benefit only applies to mobile right now. In February, they're going to start applying the ranking benefit to desktop as well. Oops. Looks like somebody's got some radio going on. Let me see if I can switch it back over. Excellent. Okay, can you still see that, Steve?
Yeah.
You see my slides? Excellent. Okay. So what I wanted to show you guys is, instead of just getting into the slides, I also wanted to show you the practical, like how this looks in real life. If you look at the top of the slides, I have this it kind of looks like a URL, and that's because it is. And if you type that URL, you'll get this resources page that I've set up. And if you click this link to check good page experience on current site, it'll load up the Search Console, and you could pick one of your properties up here, whether it's for a client or for your current employer. And you can actually look at the search benefit you're getting from Core Web Vitals right now, and how much that's impacting performance if you have access to Search Console. So next slide. So there's kind of three steps in this process. First is you get Core Web Vitals passing, and that basically it's not necessarily your page speed or how long your site takes to load. It's actually within the Lighthouse testing suite that measures your site performance and just how well your site is built. There's three specific metrics that they measure that they want you to pass, that they consider kind of cornerstone metrics, core metrics. And when you pass those metrics, if you can pass those, it's pretty much 99.99 whatever percent of the time you're gonna create a great page experience for your users. So they call those metrics Core Web Vitals. And once you pass all three of those metrics within the range of either good or sometimes, kind of a mid, almost good range, you'll get a good page experience benefit out of search. And what that'll show up in your Search Console. And then from there, you'll get traffic to your site, which everybody loves. So how do you you measure these steps at each part? For Core Web Vitals, that's going to be with web.dev, so HTTPS web.dev, and it's kind of a Lighthouse, but just in an online format that Google hosts, where you can run a Lighthouse test on any site. I like it because it's kind of a good sort of universal source of truth. One of the problems with testing Lighthouse is it's not meant to be a universal score. It's meant to be a score based on your device and your context within that you're testing in. And so you might run a Lighthouse score within Chrome on your super fast MacBook with 25 M1 cores or something. But your client probably has a much slower computer and they're going to get a different score. So I like to score based on web.dev, where it's running, the browser is running the process, or really it's the Google's tools are running the process. So you get a consistent measurement between you and your clients, or you and whoever you're presenting these improvements to. That way, they can't come back and say like, well, you didn't do anything or you made it worse. It's like, well, no, actually you're just measuring it at a different level. And then the next area where we measure is Google Search Console. And this is where we can actually see the impact of good page experience, which is coming from those Core Web Vitals passing. And that's how we know that all this performance work is actually getting us a result. And then the final one is traffic analytics. You can see if you see an uptick in your analytics, whether that be Fathom or Google Analytics, you can correlate that to the Google Search Console. If you can see it's this kind of the similar increase, well, then you know it's working. So getting into the actual Web Vitals themselves, again, there's tons and tons of Web Vitals Google has, but these are the 3 core Web Vitals that they want people to focus on that actually get you the search ranking benefit. First is largest contentful paint. This is the closest one to an actual load time, but it's not necessarily load time. It's a little longer than that, and I'll get into that in a second. The second one is first input delay, and first input delay is basically the first time a user clicks on anything on the page. Now, this metric, the funny thing about it is that it actually can't exist in Lighthouse Test Suite because it's based on a real user input. Now, you can go as a developer and click on whatever you're going to click on first, but that's just you assuming what you think the user is going to click on first. For first input delay, they actually want to measure the real world first input delay of whatever users click on your site first in the real world, and it might be something different every time. And then the last of the 3 is cumulative layout shift, and this is basically the visual stability of your page. Do things jump around as you scroll? Do things like when you're running the initial load? Does the content like get pushed down by an ad or an image as it's loading? I'm sure you guys have experienced where you're scrolling through something and you tap on something as like the split second before you tap on it, like an ad or something jumps below your finger, and it's a super frustrating experience. Turns out that actually has a business impact on your site. So they measure the cumulative layout or the visual stability of your site loading. Now, if you notice below each of these scores is kind of a good, needs improvement, and poor. And then you have 2 numbers kind of to set the range of when you're in those metrics. And so with LCP, since LCP is just a time when your site loads, basically it's when whatever the largest above the fold of your initial load, whatever the largest element on your page is, whenever that element finishes loading, is fully rendered or painted, that's when LCP finishes. So it's not necessarily what you would think in the WordPress world of like jQuery ready. That's not technically when jQuery ready fires. That just means the DOM is ready. It doesn't necessarily mean the page is loaded. There's also DOM content loaded, but similar kind of problem. And that means the DOM content is ready, but there might be secondary things you're loading in and rendering in that don't exist yet because they don't exist in the initial HTML or whatever was accessible before that load time. So this is why they created LCP, to have this kind of ultimate metric of like this is when definitively the page is what is in what the user would describe is loaded. So visually loaded, not just technically. And they measure this from when the request is initially made to that largest paint finishing. So you can see a good range is under 2.5 seconds. All kinds of brands, as you'll see later, don't even make this score of 2.5 seconds. This LCP is one of the hardest scores to get into the green. The second one is under 4.7 or under 4 seconds means needs improvement. So this means it's not terrible, but it needs work. And then you can see for first input delay, it's measured in milliseconds. And this doesn't necessarily correlate to any kind of load time. It's when its first input delay starts when the user taps on an element and how long Google defines in that context the page takes to react. So it finishes or react and realize that there's a change that needs to be made. And then finally, cumulative layout shift is basically made it's kind of a ratio because it's measured visually. And so it's kind of how the stability of things, how much they move up and down or left and right, things like that. So go on the next slide. So there are some misconceptions about ranking fast sites. I almost forgot. Going back one slide. I also wanted to go into how to measure these. So when you want to measure these core web vitals to determine if you're going to get a ranking benefit, it works like this. If any of these scores is in the poor range, so in the case of LCP, that would be if your LCP is 4 seconds or longer, you do not get any search ranking benefit from that particular page or from that group of pages. If it's in the orange range, if any of your scores are if like maybe you have 2 scores, the common case is FID and CLS are in the good range, and then LCP is either orange or in the red. So if the cases you have FID passing, CLS passing, and LCP is in the orange, you might still get a search benefit, but it's not guaranteed. If they, in the case of where every closest competitor you have is just scoring in the poor, then they might go ahead and register that search ranking benefit to your site. Ideally, you want to be all in the green. And then if you're all in the green, you have your search ranking benefit is guaranteed. That means you will get that extra bump. And then past green. So if you're in the green and you have a competitor site that you're trying to outrank that's in the green, you simply have to be faster than them. So if your competitor site is 2.4 seconds and on LCP, then you simply have to get a better score than 2.4 seconds, and then you'll get to outrank them. Okay, so getting back into misconceptions. So Core Web Vitals is not the most important ranking factor. This is very important. You can't set up a White House website with perfect Core Web Vitals and then outrank, the actual White House website. There has to be equal relevance first. Once there's equal relevance, then it'll start ranking based on speed. And so this doesn't, basically what happens is if you just search for your sites, for your pages on their own, the impact of Core Web Vitals isn't necessarily obvious, but it's going to be obvious across tons and tons and tons of searches, maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands of searches. It's a subtle impact that increases or decreases over time. But it's going to be very important in competitive searches. So especially commerce, content marketing, those areas where there's a lot of competition for ranking, it's going to be super critical, especially because it takes an engineer like you guys to get these Core Web Vitals passing. Unfortunately, if there's people out there that sell themselves as like SEO gurus and SEO ninjas, but they don't have any engineering experience, any front-end experience, any experience engineering back-end WordPress, they can't do what you can do then. And so this is a cool way of Google kind of giving a very, I've heard it called technical SEO, where you have to have very, very practical coding experience to do well at it. And so the traffic increase is going to be based on real world device performance. Now, in the core web vitals, there's two types of metrics. There's field data and lab data. Field data is what you see when you test on Lighthouse or PageSpeed Insights or web.dev. It is the simulated loading of a device. Now, the thing about these core web vitals, the thing that they're trying to focus on is real world, the way people experience websites in the real world, not in a simulated test. So you have the field data you have the lab data, which is Lighthouse and all those, and then you have the field data that is what is the data Google actually captures from usually Chrome, probably Android devices as well, when people volunteer to have their data used as diagnostics for Google to figure out sites. Excuse me. So your ranking benefit is going to always be based on the field data. So just because it's checked and just because it's looking great in the simulated like Lighthouse scores doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a ranking benefit out of it. However, it's still pretty likely. So usually the simulated scores tend to be a little more harsher than the real world results, and I imagine that's on purpose because they don't want people to get disappointed after all their work. Another thing is larger sites are just simply going to have a hard time. So if you're a smaller company and you're using more modern technologies, or you're using more modern tools with your WordPress site, you're going to have an advantage over larger sites that have bigger ships to turn around, especially on the largest content full paint, because there's so many factors that pull that down. People want analytics, people want tag manager, and things like that, and all those extra assets, especially images, can pull that score down. The other part is field data is a 28-day average of all of the data collected. And so if you fix your issues and you can go into Search Console and it'll provide and tell you what the issues are with your site that it's seeing right now. When you fix those issues, it can take up to 28 days for that data to propagate through, because since your scoring is the average of those 28 days. Another thing is pages can be grouped. So there's not necessarily always going to be a single score, like a single passing or failing rank for your whole site. There can be for very small sites, but generally and over time, Google will break up your pages into groups. So let's say your product pages load faster than your blog pages. So your product pages, if they're passing, will get that benefit, and your blog pages, if they're not passing, will not get that benefit. So that way, it's a little more fair. One part of your site is going to drag down the other, but that's not guaranteed. And then next part is so how do you check the core web vitals? Again, going into core web vitals is one of 200 ranking signals Google already uses. You can check and your Google Search Console with that. If you look at the link up at the top, the sam.lc/faster, you can check that link to that part in your Search Console. And you can also check using, again, the measuring tools I mentioned. So Lighthouse, PageSpeed Insights. I didn't mention PageSpeed Insights. You can Google it and it'll pop up. It only measures the performance of your site, but it does actually report the field data that Google has got from your site, if they've gotten some. Another thing is not all sites are going to report field data immediately. I've seen sites as low as 200 or 300 visitors a month start reporting field data, and I've seen sites as high as 3,000 not reporting field data. So mileage may vary on that. You just have to, as long as you're passing those simulated metrics, you should be good. You just have to keep an eye on that when that starts to report. So here are 3 examples in PageSpeed Insights of scores I did recently. First is Reddit, and so Reddit is they're the first number you see at the top for Reddit, the 33. That's not necessarily the core web vitals. That's just a 0 to 100 average score and it just kind of gives you an immediate impression on how the Lighthouse tooling system scores that, and it's going to be a similar score in web.dev and in the Lighthouse in your Chrome browser. Now, if you look down below, you see these blue check boxes or check marks or bookmarks, and those are the Core Web Vitals. That's how you distinguish Core Web Vitals. And you can see that LCP is 5 seconds, and if you remember, that's too slow. I believe LCP, anything past 4 seconds is not passing. So Reddit is not getting a search benefit. Reddit, this company with I believe hundreds of millions of dollars of funds, is not getting this ranking benefit because their site isn't fast enough yet. However, they are doing good on first input delay, 28 milliseconds, and cumulative layout shift. Next, we have Microsoft. Again, they're in the orange, so they're under 4 seconds. So they may be getting some benefit, but not necessarily the full benefit just yet. And then we have Netflix. Netflix, I don't think Netflix very much cares about Google since all their content is in-house. They have their own system. But again, they're in the orange, 3.2 seconds. So this can give you an idea of even some of the biggest names online still haven't quite optimized their site for the best performance. Next, we have Amazon. Now, the funny thing is if you look at this score at the top of 34, it's colored red and not green. So that could tell you it's probably a bad performance score. However, if you look closely, LCP is 1.7. First input delay is 31 milliseconds. Cumulative layout shift is 0.01. They're passing Core Web Vitals. They may not have the fastest site, but they are passing. And that means they're getting a guaranteed ranking benefit. Now, if you can score, if you have equal relevance with Amazon and you can score faster than 1.7 seconds on your LCP, that means you'll rank better than them. But this top score doesn't necessarily correlate exactly with passing Core Web Vitals, and that's an interesting thing that you might see sometimes in rare occasions. Next, we have Wikipedia, a very, very light site. They don't really have hardly any JavaScript or images on their homepage, or very minimal images, I should say. And they're doing really great on their metrics. Here we go. So some of you guys might have remembered earlier when I said first input delay is based on real world data. When you're running tests in Lighthouse, it won't ever display first input delay because Lighthouse isn't a person and it doesn't have a first input to give the site. So I believe the substitute for that is first contentful paint when you're scoring. So next we have Google. Google is a small company in Mountain View, California. They index websites or something like that. You may have heard of them. They do not have a perfect performance score. They are passing their own Core Web Vitals. However, something to keep in mind, just because it's a Google product doesn't mean it will pass Core Web Vitals. Just because it's a Google product does not mean it won't make your site worse, or the way it makes your site worse won't be discounted just because it's a Google product. One of the worst examples is YouTube embeds. So if you're loading your YouTube embeds normally, and especially above the fold, they're going to drag down your performance score by a lot because that's not YouTube's priority right now. Eventually they'll fix it, but not even Google products don't pass Core Web Vitals. And the same thing applies with Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager. These services can drag your score down, and if it drags your score down, it's not. You have to figure out a way around it. You have to figure out a way to do that. With YouTube embeds, you can lazy load them, which can help a ton. Or you can also do pre-connects. If you look up the project YouTube Lite, it's a library specifically dedicated to solving this problem of how heavy YouTube video embeds are for page speed. Even if they don't autoplay, even if they're just loading up and sitting there, it's still very heavy. It's effectively no difference whether or not you autoplay them. And then going on the next part. So passing Core Web Vitals. So one of my favorite ways and methods for passing Core Web Vitals is going to be building on modern development tools and frameworks. This gets around the frameworks like Vue and React, but building on Jamstack tools. and static-based sites. And in the WordPress world, this can be tricky, but this is one of the most effective ways I've found to get control of your site's performance, is to completely detach from all your plugin dependencies with a custom coded site. Either with, you could do Hugo 11D if you don't want to be attached to a framework, or you can do things like Next.js, Nuxt.js if you want to build a React-based framework. And the way this works is basically you pull in your WordPress data via REST or via the unofficial GraphQL API that comes with WordPress, and then you generate your content from scratch with your own code. And it can look exactly the same as your current WordPress site if you want, or it could be completely brand new. And this is one of the most aggressive approaches, but this is going to get you ultimately some of the best scoring. But it isn't always possible to start from scratch. So for existing sites, images. Like, I can't stress that enough. Images are one of the most crucial things you need to focus on. Some of you may have heard, may be well versed in lazy loading already, which is great. If you're not, basically lazy loading is you're not loading an image or resource until you scroll to it, which you might think that sounds like it would slow down the site, but because you're detaching all that resource and you're slimming down what's required to load the page initially, it improves performance dramatically. And when you if you load the image like a tenth of a second before it scrolls into the user viewport, they never even noticed. And they have to scroll actually very fast. And then if you do a fade effect on it, it looks intentional. So lazy loading is also a critical thing. Another thing people forget about is preloading. So what people will do is they do know what lazy loading is, but they'll lazy load every single image on a site. And this is actually not great. You want to lazy load 99% of the images, basically anything that is not on the screen when the page loads initially. However, if an image has to be on the screen when the site loads, lazy loading can actually hurt your performance, because you're telling the browser, I want to delay the loading of this element. And that drags out and kind of fattens up that initial loading process and makes it more complicated. So an alternative, kind of the opposite of lazy loading, is telling the browser, hey, I want you to prioritize loading this. And that's called preloading. And you can set preloading with meta tags in your head. Or there's WordPress plugins that can do it as well. And preloading will actually increase your site's performance, because you're hinting to the browser what you want to load first, what's priority. The next thing past images is whatever recommendations PageSpeed and Lighthouse give when you score their sites. Those are going to be pretty safe. You don't necessarily have to fix all of the things, but you can either start with the biggest hit to your performance or the easiest to fix. Generally, those things, those are pretty good starting points. The advice they get on those are pretty good. So I would dig through those and look at each one of those, and so you can understand what's going on. Another one is something some of you guys are probably already using, and these are simply caching solutions. There's caching plugins, and then there's Cloudflare DNS, which caches your requests. And this basically, the first request goes out to a user, and then the subsequent requests are cached, and then they have a special smart mechanisms to detect when those are going to be updated. And so they can always keep that data fresh without having to actually go all the way back to the server. And this dramatically improves it basically virtually removes the server load time, which is excellent for performance. Another thing is static plugins. There's a WP to static and then simply static. I believe I've referenced these in my resources link. And if not, you can message me and I'll send them to you. These simply create a static version of your existing WordPress site, and you can set them up to create it on like whatever you want. What I like to do is I'll talk about this in a second. I'll create a system where it generates a static version of the site on every post save. And another thing you can do is subdomain sharding. So this is basically where, let's say, you've kind of wrung out all the optimizations you can get for now. You can actually move the elements, the parts of your site that simply can't be optimized further, and then move those onto a separate subdomain and start with a new subdomain that's either a custom site, custom code, or something brand new that's much lighter, and have those kind of separated out, so you have more control over that performance. So one part of the site isn't getting burdened by the other. Another final thing is hybrid static sites. So this is a style of static site for WordPress that I've been tinkering with and experimenting with some of my client projects. And basically, you take a static plugin, you generate that your site from that static plugin, and then you get kind of those HTML files. They're effectively just plain text and images, and just like back in the 90s and early 2000s. It's just simple HTML. And you take your static site generator, such as Gatsby or Next, and you generate another static site, and then you merge those folders, or you generate on top of it. So what you're getting is it's actually a mix between the raw static output of your site, effectively a very very heavy form, or a very like solid form of caching, of serious caching, combined with more modern features that you get with static site generators. And so you build a system where every time you save a WordPress post or page, it'll run that generation process, and within 2 to 3 minutes, all of your static resources will be saved, deployed, and generated and live in production. And this is kind of combining continuous deployment with WordPress is in a cool way. But anyway, that is my talk. Now it's time for questions.
All right, we have a question from Sharon. You gave a lot of solutions for non-coding solutions, but do you have any plugin recommendations? Anything that a non-coder can do to really improve the CWV?
Yeah, a big plugin that I didn't mention, but it's still pretty important, is asset cleanup. What you have, there's a billion image and caching plugins out there. The first one that comes to mind is I think it's WP Rocket. There's 2 or 3 others that are just as good. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend checking out those. I wish I could give you the names. Maybe I can link them. If you message me afterwards, I can tell you exactly what they are. But once you get your image, go ahead.
I found Asset Cleanup. I never heard of it, but it looks good. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So the funny thing is Asset Cleanup actually helps with a thing that is, once you get your images fixed, which the plugins these days are pretty good at doing that automatically. The next thing you have to fix is your JavaScript and CSS assets you're loading on your pages. So the way to do that is simply, if you let's say you download a plugin for really cool tables, and so you have tables of data. But on your home page, you would notice that if you look into into the HTML of that, you don't, even though you don't have that tables plugin, those tables specifically rendering and loaded on your home page, it's still loading that CSS. So you're still taking the performance penalty of having those tables loaded, even though you're not using them. So what Asset Cleanup does is it lets you go in and pick specific pages and only load the resources on those pages. Now, theoretically, the plugin should already do this automatically, but honestly, that's only 1 in 1,000 that will be courteous enough to have that performance built in. Most of this you're going to have to do on your own. And Asset Cleanup lets you manually go through and unload a lot of those scripts and assets. Now, you have to be careful. Sometimes you will actually need something for a page and not realize it. So it's good to disable things kind of in small chunks or one at a time. But asset cleanup is going to be the after you get images sorted out, asset cleanup is going to be the next best thing. That's the majority of issues that are going to be reported in Lighthouse are going to be revolving around your JavaScript and CSS assets. And so cutting those out entirely helps fix that a ton. And then it works great with other plugins that'll minify code and things like that. It's built to be compatible with all kinds of things like that. Does that answer that question pretty good?
Yeah, I think that was a good option. Yeah, I think the caching plugins are a great idea. So what's got here? Donald's asking, what do you think? How much improvement would you get from converting images to WebP?
A ton. Actually, well, and that's something I should have mentioned. I would say generally, if you're not supporting Internet Explorer, and at this point, it's kind of like telling people to wear a seatbelt. You really shouldn't support it because you're supporting people using an unsecure technology. So if you don't support Internet Explorer, you're basically free reign. I believe Safari and Opera is now Chromium based, so basically Opera is Chrome, and then Firefox supports WebP as well. If you want to be extra safe, you can use source set images and it'll give the browser like a PNG and a WebP version. But yeah, WebP is going to be going to give you a huge benefit. And then I would also recommend, and sometimes there's also plugins that will convert WebP automatically for you within WordPress. I would also recommend, in the long term, within the next 2 or 3 years, there's a format, I believe it's called AVIF, that's designed to be the next even smaller, more optimized version of replacement for WebP. And I'd recommend looking into that. If you find a plugin that can optimize for that, I would do that as well. I believe it's already supported in Chrome and Firefox. I could be totally wrong on this. And then I don't think it's supported on Safari.
Okay, Sam, you're starting to break up.
Oh, sorry about that. How am I sounding now?
Yeah.
Am I coming through all right now?
Yeah, better. I don't see you, but that's, I'd rather hear you right now. So yeah, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, excellent.
What was that? What was that next format after WebP? You broke up when you said it.
Oh, AVIF. You could look on Can I Use and look at the specific support for that. I wish I had an email where you could get emailed when it's supported, but they don't do that. But yeah, AVIF, and that's a image format that's even newer than WebP, that can be compress the images even better.
Right. Awesome. That link I put in there for that plugin, the WebP Converter plugin, so that will check. I'm just letting everyone else know. I think you know this, but that will check to make sure the user's browser actually supports WebP. Most modern browsers do. Some don't. So you don't want to deliver a WebP image to a browser that doesn't support it. So that plugin, at least it says it does, it checks the user's browser first, and if it supports it, it delivers WebP. So
another thing to note, if the images you're uploading are just graphics, there's actually a format that is even better than WebP. It can compress even better than AVIF, and it's called SVG. It's supported by every browser. So if the images you have don't actually contain any photography, then that means they don't need the style of compression that JPEG uses, and you can just export them as, if you can get the original from the designer from Adobe Illustrator or wherever they built it, and you can get the SVG version, you can just put that up on there, and that will be, it can be as much as 1/100th of the original size, and then you can scale it up as big as you want.
Nice. Yeah, SVGs are awesome. E is asking, is there a good image optimization tool that's not, I don't understand the rest of the question here, but he's not a developer. Just is there a good image optimization tool that you can recommend?
Actually, there is. Outside of WordPress, outside of the automated plugins, I really like TinyPNG. it's just a nice website for optimizing PNGs. Generally, if your images are a mixture of photography and graphics, meaning there's parts of it that are, it's like maybe it's like an iPhone screen. It's like the iPhone itself is built in some kind of 3D program, and then put into an image. But the picture, like the profile pictures on the screenshot, those are photography. So for mixed media, PNG is good. If it's purely a photo, then you want to stick with. You're gonna have to go to WebP or ABIF. I think WebP and ABIF may be already optimized for this, so I don't want to lead you guys astray. The best thing is just converting it to a few different file formats and seeing which one comes out the smallest, but still looks nice. Nice. And then Google also has a tool that they built. The name of it is escaping me right now. If somebody can find it, but it's like a website where you can preview the conversion and then download the optimized file. But you have to do it one image at a time, which can be a little bit time consuming. I think it's called Splash or Splosh or something. Squish, something like that.
Oh,
Squoosh?
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've answered the question. I have a quick question though. Using Cloudflare's free level, have you seen a big difference when a customer when you switch someone over to Cloudflare?
Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of all things Cloudflare. I try not to plug them too much because I'm a little bit biased. But yeah, just using that caching can be a big difference. I've heard that their paid product Argo and can actually give you if you're really going into the extremes of performance, it can give you a faster DNS timing, which affects all of your metrics. So the DNS timing happens after you make the initial requests. So that means it affects the time your initial page takes to load. It affects the time every one of your images takes to load. And so if you can shorten your DNS time, that could make a big impact. But generally, Cloudflare's free products can get you pretty far. For 99% of people, Cloudflare free will be a pretty good setup. The problem is that you have to hand over your DNS records to them, and so some DevOps people, some managers won't love that. You'll just have to have a conversation about that, about how to navigate that.
I think you can just point your DNS to them as well. You may not get the full benefit, but I think you can. I'm pretty sure I've done that. If that still exists. I'm not sure if that's still a service that still exists. But it's recommended. I mean, if you don't have to be a developer to do this, you have to understand some stuff. But Cloudflare will give you really great instructions. It's a free service, and it works great. So highly recommended. Eileen's writing. She's been reading that when it comes specifically to post-feature images, lazy loading can actually hurt CVB. Even though it helps elsewhere on the page, but I haven't found a way to disable lazy loading on a specific class of photos site-wide. You can disable on all photos. Any thought for this? I have an answer, but I'll let you go for that one.
Oh yeah, you might just have to use a different plugin, or you can. If you really want to get technical, you can go and find a developer that could set up a filter for your existing plugin. So it'll create a condition. The problem is the server, the server that's running your WordPress site has to somehow know which images need to not be lazy loaded or which those images need to be preloaded, if that's what you're asking. That was the question she was asking, right, Steve?
Yeah. So I think yes, it was. But I'll expand on that, but in WordPress 5.5, and I'll put the link here, WordPress includes lazy loading now. So it automatically, and so does most major browsers, right? So if you just mark it as loading equals lazy, the browser should do that, and WordPress does that automatically. The private plugins to disable individually, there are some code snippets in the link that I just sent in terms of how to disable, so you may have to look into that, but you should be able to ask WordPress not to.
I can add a little more color there. In WordPress 5.9, there's a change that addresses this issue. It won't mark the lazy loading tag for the first image on a page. Essentially, the heuristic isn't exactly that, but it will not output the lazy loading tag from WordPress 5.9 on in those situations, specifically because of this issue. So you shouldn't have to do anything after 5.9.
Awesome, and that's the next presentation that's coming up, so you'll learn more about that. Any other questions for Sam? Anyone else? Great. Sam, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation.